Pregnant wife discovered her millionaire husband's secret baby with the mistress. Then something. The camera pans over a sprawling Beverly Hills estate, a grand mansion shimmering with wealth and elegance under the Californian sun. But beyond the gleaming marble floors and designer-clad guests lies a web of secrets on the brink of unraveling. Victoria Caldwell, a glowing mother-to-be, suspects her charismatic millionaire husband, Maxwell Pierce, is hiding something far more shocking than mere business deals. Whispers of infidelity swirl through the corridors, and the echo of a mysterious child's laughter threatens to topple their gilded life. In this story of privilege and betrayal, loyalties will be tested, hearts will be shattered, and love will face its darkest hour. Victoria Caldwell was a woman of many dreams. Growing up in a humble neighborhood in San Diego, she fantasized about a life of comfort, one free from the incessant worry of unpaid bills and second-hand clothes. From an early age, she displayed an uncanny determination. At 12, she was holding bake sales to help her mother pay rent. By 15, she had her sights set on scholarships, certain that education was her path to success. That unyielding drive carried her through college, where she studied marketing and graduated at the top of her class. She landed an entry-level position at a boutique advertising agency in Los Angeles, forging her own path in a cutthroat industry. Despite her youth, she soon earned accolades for her fresh ideas and remarkable focus. Yet, as unstoppable as Victoria's ambition was, no one could have predicted how fate would intertwine her life with a millionaire named Maxwell Pierce. Maxwell Pierce was the kind of man who could captivate an entire room merely by walking in. Born into wealth, he lived in a world where lavish parties at the Four Seasons and invitations to exclusive charity galas were the norm. He stood tall with broad shoulders and a magnetic presence that seemed to pull people into his orbit. His father, Gerald Pierce, had built a real estate empire spanning the West Coast and parts of Europe. Max, as his friends called him, was groomed from birth to inherit the empire, learning the intricacies of deals, negotiations, and power brokering. By the time he turned 30, Maxwell had already taken the reins of Pierce Real Estate Holdings, expanding it into a global conglomerate. He was fluent in corporate speak and PR spin, yet somehow maintained a down-to-earth charm that made him both relatable and unreachable at the same time. Their worlds collided at a lavish charity event in Beverly Hills. Victoria had been tasked by her advertising agency to manage the promotional campaign for the event, ensuring top-tier exposure. Maxwell arrived late, drawing gazes as soon as he stepped into the ballroom, exuding an effortless authority. Victoria, juggling last-minute details, found herself fumbling with a microphone cord. She cursed under her breath, frustrated as the wires tangled. Maxwell offered a quick, steadying hand, his voice a soft reassurance in the chaos. "Let me help." She looked up, meeting his steady blue eyes and polished smile. Sparks flickered in that moment, electric, undeniable. Later, they shared a dance, drifting across the marble floor as though the night itself had conspired to bring them together. By the end of the evening, Maxwell asked for her number. Despite her reservations, he was a millionaire heir. After all, she found herself saying yes. It was the start of something extraordinary, a whirlwind romance that would change both their lives forever. Their courtship was every bit the fairy tale. Maxwell whisked Victoria away to weekends in Napa Valley, sending her favorite flowers, pink peonies, to her office just because. He introduced her to a lifestyle she had once only glimpsed in glossy magazines: sunrise breakfasts served by private chefs, spontaneous shopping sprees down Rodeo Drive, exclusive events where they rubbed shoulders with celebrities and moguls. Victoria felt like she was living a dream, pinching herself daily to confirm it was real. As the weeks blurred into months, she discovered in Maxwell not just a wealthy benefactor but a surprisingly genuine soul. He remembered small details: her love for peppermint tea, her fear of thunderstorms, her fascination with impressionist art. His consideration dissolved any doubts she'd harbored. When he finally proposed on a private yacht off the coast of Catalina Island, down on one knee, the sunset painting the horizon in pinks and golds, Victoria's eyes brimmed with tears. She said yes. From that moment forward, her life became an even grander adventure, one in which she could envision a future filled with love, success, and family. Their wedding was an extravagant yet intimate affair at a cliffside villa in Malibu. Overlooking the Pacific, the ceremony took place under a canopy of white roses and twinkling fairy lights. Dressed in a Vera Wang gown, Victoria glowed as she walked down the aisle. Maxwell, in a custom Tom Ford suit, looked equally radiant, his expression a mixture of pride and deep affection. Guests included Hollywood A-listers, prominent philanthropists, and high-profile business partners. Even Richard Branson made a brief appearance, exchanging pleasantries with Maxwell about a joint venture they'd once discussed. Despite the high society glamour, the moment that mattered most was the simple exchange of vows. Maxwell's voice trembled ever so slightly when he promised to love, cherish, and remain faithful to Victoria. The applause from the assembled crowd was thunderous, but to Victoria's ears, it all fell away, leaving only the resonating echo of their vows, binding them together in sacred union. Their honeymoon was equally splendid. Maxwell surprised Victoria with a trip to Bora Bora, where they stayed in an overwater bungalow with a glass floor that revealed vibrant coral and schools of exotic fish. There, the couple relished in the thrill of new marriage. In between snorkeling sessions and candlelit dinners, they talked about the future, what kind of house they might raise children in, whether they would keep living in Los Angeles or perhaps build a coastal retreat in Maui. They traded baby names with a playful seriousness that only deepened their bond. Victoria proposed Eleanor, if it was a girl, after her grandmother, while Maxwell countered with Sebastian for a boy. Little did they know that life had a different, more complicated plan in store, and the conversation about family was about to take a hauntingly different shape than either of them could anticipate. Returning from Bora Bora, Victoria resumed her work at the advertising agency, though Maxwell encouraged her to join Pierce Real Estate Holdings in their marketing department. She declined politely, wishing to maintain a sense of independence. The couple settled into a comfortable routine in their hillside Bel Air mansion. Maxwell would often work from dawn until late evening, attending meetings, courting investors, and overseeing major deals. Victoria's schedule was flexible, allowing her to come home early and plan their social calendar. While the outside world viewed them as a quintessential power couple, behind the scenes, a subtle tension began to brew. It started with Maxwell taking calls in private and responding vaguely when Victoria asked him about them. At first, she chalked it up to the demands of big business. But the knot in her stomach tightened each time she watched him slip into another room, phone pressed to his ear, a guarded expression on his face. One night, after a grueling day at work, Victoria drifted off on the living room couch. She awoke to the sound of Maxwell's hushed voice echoing through the hallway. She glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. Maxwell rarely held late-night calls, and something about his tone sounded urgent, almost desperate. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that high-stakes deals in different time zones sometimes demanded odd hours. Still, curiosity got the better of her. She tiptoed closer to the study, pressing her ear against the heavy oak door. She picked up fragments. No, she doesn't suspect anything. I'll handle the support payments. We have to be careful. A surge of panic exploded in her chest. The words circled her mind, refusing to settle. Support payments. Careful about what? She backed away from the door, heart pounding as if the very air had thickened with danger. Over the next few weeks, Victoria became increasingly vigilant, searching for clues in Maxwell's behavior. He had grown distant, less affectionate, more easily irritable. Whenever she asked if something was wrong, he would wave her away, explaining that work stress was at an all-time high. She wanted to believe him, yet her instincts whispered that there was more than just business weighing on him. In an attempt to calm her suspicions, she confided in her closest friend, Samantha Brooks, a fellow marketing executive she'd known since college. Samantha listened intently over a brunch at the Ivy, urging Victoria to keep an eye out for any unusual activity. "If it's just work, you'll know," Samantha said, her voice steady. "But if it's something else, you have a right to the truth." Victoria nodded, thankful for the support, though uncertain how to proceed. Every day, she felt like a detective in her own marriage, scanning for evidence that would confirm or deny her worst fears. Then came the morning sickness. At first, Victoria chalked it up to a stomach bug, but when it persisted for over a week, she took a pregnancy test. The result was positive. She felt a surge of joy mingled with trepidation. A baby. Their baby. She pictured Maxwell's face lighting up with excitement. Yet a voice inside her conjured up doubts. What if he was too engrossed in his secret dealings to share her elation? Summoning her courage, she placed the test in a small gift box, adorned it with a ribbon, and left it on his nightstand with a handwritten note, "Ready for our next adventure." That evening, Maxwell found the box. He opened it slowly, eyes widening in genuine surprise. For a brief moment, his features softened with joy, the tension in his brow melting as he pulled Victoria into a tender embrace. "We're going to be parents," he whispered. In that moment, she believed everything would be all right. Buoyed by the prospect of becoming parents, Victoria and Maxwell enjoyed a brief resurgence of harmony. He accompanied her to the first prenatal appointments, inquiring about her diet and suggesting a maternity concierge service to make her life easier. They began discussing nursery designs, browsing through catalogues of high-end baby furniture. Their bedroom saw nights of laughter and shared excitement. Yet beneath that fragile calm, Victoria still sensed an undercurrent of secrecy. Late-night phone calls persisted, sometimes masked by Maxwell, claiming he needed to step out to the patio for fresh air. More than once she overheard him mutter the name Celia. Each time she felt a pang in her heart, uncertain who Celia was or what role she played in her husband's life. One day, Victoria followed Maxwell when he claimed he had a crucial meeting downtown. She felt guilty, but she had to know the truth. Keeping a safe distance in her sleek Mercedes SUV, she watched him drive to a less glamorous part of Los Angeles, a humble apartment complex far removed from the glitz of Beverly Hills. She parked discreetly, catching a glimpse of Maxwell stepping inside, glancing over his shoulder as if to ensure no one had followed. Victoria's pulse thundered in her ears. He was inside for nearly an hour. When he finally emerged, he wasn't alone. A slender woman with chestnut hair and a distraught expression accompanied him to his car. She was clutching something, a baby carrier. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she saw the tiny, wriggling figure within the carrier. Maxwell placed a gentle hand on the baby's head before leaning in to kiss the woman's cheek. Victoria felt her world tilt violently, as if gravity had abandoned her. Confusion, betrayal, and anger warred within her. The evidence was too blatant to dismiss. Maxwell had a child with another woman. But how long had this been going on? Was this an affair that predated their marriage, or had it continued all along? As she sat behind the wheel, tears blurring her vision, Victoria struggled to breathe. She contemplated confronting him immediately, but fear gripped her. The meltdown in her emotions clashed with the life growing in her belly. She was pregnant with Maxwell's child, yet he already had a secret baby. The implications were overwhelming. Trembling, she drove home, her thoughts a jumbled mess of heartbreak and resolve. She needed a plan, some way to confront him and learn the truth, no matter how horrifying. That evening, Maxwell arrived home, greeting Victoria with a subdued warmth. She noticed the faint smell of baby powder lingering on his suit. Her stomach churned. She mustered the strength to act normal, deciding that an explosive confrontation would do no one any good, especially not her unborn child. Instead, she asked Samantha for help. The next day, they met in a discreet corner booth at a quiet cafe. Samantha listened wide-eyed as Victoria recounted everything she'd seen. "You need proof," Samantha advised, suggesting that Victoria hire a private investigator. Confronting him without evidence might lead him to hide even more. "You have to be strategic." Though the idea of employing a pie made her feel as if she'd stepped onto the set of a soap opera, Victoria realized the truth was already stranger than fiction. She agreed, determined to uncover every detail Maxwell had kept hidden. Enter Frank Delacroix, a grizzled private investigator who came highly recommended by Samantha's cousin, an attorney. He wasn't cheap, but he had a reputation for being relentless and discreet. Victoria handed him the bare essentials: Maxwell's schedule, the location of the apartment she'd followed him to, and the name Celia. She apologized for the vagueness, but Delacroix only nodded, his expression reassuring. "I've dealt with worse," he said. "Give me a week, and I'll have something concrete for you." Over the ensuing days, Victoria vacillated between dread and hope. She knew that once she received Delacroix's report, her life might change irreversibly. In her calmer moments, she clung to the possibility that maybe there was an explanation, an old friend's child, a relative in need. But the image of Maxwell's gentle touch on that baby's head haunted her, searing into her consciousness a truth that she could no longer deny. Time crawled by. Each day, Maxwell went about his routine, and Victoria found herself studying him like a stranger. She noticed subtle signs, the way he sometimes cradled his phone while typing messages in a corner, the guilty flicker in his eyes if she happened to catch him off guard. At night, when he curled up beside her in bed, she fought the urge to ask him point-blank who Celia was and whose baby he had cradled. But her resolve remained firm: wait for Delacroix. On the 6th day, the investigator texted her to meet at a small diner on the outskirts of town, far from any place Maxwell frequented. Victoria arrived early, sipping herbal tea while her anxiety soared. When Delacroix finally slid into the booth, she braced for impact. He handed her a slim manila folder, his eyes reflecting sympathy as he said, "I'm sorry, Miss S. Pierce. It's worse than you thought." Heart-pounding, Victoria opened the folder. Inside were photos of Maxwell visiting Celia Parker at her modest apartment on 3 separate occasions. In each set, he held a small infant, barely a few months old. One particularly damning photo captured Maxwell tenderly kissing Celia on the forehead as she wiped tears from her eyes. Delacroix explained that Celia, age 26, was originally from Seattle and had moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in modeling. She had apparently met Maxwell at a charity fashion show about a year before Victoria and Maxwell were married. "Looks like the affair started before your wedding," Delacroix added, his voice hushed. There are also records of money transfers from Maxwell's personal account to Celia over the past several months. Regular payments. Victoria's stomach twisted. Her temples throbbed. The confirmation felt like a physical blow. She had to force herself to breathe, to think of the growing life inside her. Finally, she managed to whisper, "And the baby? Is it Maxwell's?" Delacroix nodded gravely. "It seems very likely, ma'am. The birth certificate lists the father as unknown, but I have emails that suggest Maxwell's paternity. It's all in the report." Driving home from the diner, Victoria gripped the steering wheel with whitened knuckles. Her mind reeled with questions. Had Maxwell planned to leave her eventually? Or was he merely supporting Celia and the baby in secret? She thought back to their wedding vows, the lavish ceremony, the open bar, and the well-dressed crowd who cheered them on. How many people had known about this and kept silent? She fought back tears, refusing to let them obscure her vision. In the mansion's driveway, she turned off the engine and sat there for a long time, gazing at the immaculate landscaping, the imported roses that Maxwell had selected. It all felt like an elaborate facade. Finally, she gathered her courage, stepping out of the car as though entering a battlefield. She had no concrete plan, but she knew she couldn't keep the truth buried any longer. That night, she confronted Maxwell in the living room. The air was tense, crackling like a live wire. At first, he tried to deny everything, eyes darting in wild confusion as though searching for an escape. "What are you talking about, Victoria?" he hissed. "Are you feeling stressed? You need to rest." But when she dropped the manila folder on the coffee table, the color drained from his face. She watched him flip through the photos, the bank statements, and Delacroix as compiled evidence, each page like a dagger. His shoulders sagged. He slumped onto the couch, staring at the floor. Finally, in a ragged voice, he admitted that Celia had indeed borne his child a daughter named Aurora. The affair had begun before he even met Victoria. By the time he knew Celia was pregnant, he had already fallen in love with Victoria. Panicked, he tried to keep Celia a secret, hoping to do the right thing by supporting her financially without disrupting his new marriage. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and Maxwell's calculated plan was crumbling around him. The conversation exploded into a night of anguish and recrimination. Victoria's tears fell like rain. She demanded to know how he could stand at the altar, vow fidelity, while hiding something so monumental. Maxwell's defenses crumbled under her righteous anger. He stammered apologies, insisting that he never intended to hurt her, that he only wanted to protect her from pain and shield his business interests from scandal. "I love you," he repeated, voice trembling. That was real. It still is. But Victoria was inconsolable. "You lied to me," she screamed, "from the start. You let me walk into this marriage not knowing I was sharing you with another family." Their raised voices echoed through the mansion, turning the marble halls into a stage for a tragic play. In the end, Maxwell retreated to one of the guest rooms, leaving Victoria sobbing alone in the master bedroom, clutching her pregnant belly as though it were the only anchor she had left in a world gone mad. In the following days, Victoria took refuge at Samantha's condo. Needing distance to process the betrayal, Maxwell bombarded her phone with calls and texts, pleading to speak or meet. She ignored them initially, focusing instead on the well-being of her unborn child. Samantha, protective as ever, offered comfort in the form of late-night conversations and homemade soups. "You have every right to walk away," Samantha reminded her, "but if you still love him, you might want to consider professional help, couples therapy at least." Conflicted, Victoria weighed her options. She wasn't naive enough to think trust could be restored with a snap of her fingers. Yet part of her still remembered the man who had proposed on a yacht, the man who had held her hand in doctors' offices, the man who had wept tears of joy at the thought of becoming a father. She decided to meet Maxwell on neutral ground, a therapy office. Their first therapy session was tense. Dr. Ellen Rise, a calm, empathetic therapist with kind eyes, welcomed them into her softly lit office. Victoria sat on one couch, arms folded, while Maxwell perched on the opposite end, eyes downcast. "Let's start with honesty," Dr. Reyes began. "Maxwell, can you tell Victoria why you chose to hide the affair and the child?" Slowly, he opened up, recounting how he'd been overwhelmed by obligations, family business, public image, societal expectations. He confessed that he was torn between supporting Celia and wanting a fresh start with Victoria. He admitted to being terrified of losing everything if the truth came to light. Victoria listened quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks as she absorbed each word. She spoke about her shattered trust, her sense of betrayal, and her fear of raising her child amidst this chaos. By the end of the session, both were emotionally drained, yet oddly relieved to have a professional guiding them through the turbulent waters of their marriage. While therapy offered a glimmer of hope for their emotional healing, the external complications remained. Word of Maxwell's secret child began to spread, fueled by hushed whispers among the Pierces' social circle. Someone had spotted Maxwell at Celia's apartment. Someone else had seen Victoria storm out of the mansion. Before long, rumors floated around that Maxwell might have fathered another child out of wedlock, threatening the family's public image. Gerald Pierce, Maxwell's father, called an emergency meeting at the Pierce Real Estate Holdings office, summoning Maxwell to explain himself. Already under strain, Maxwell found himself in a confrontation with his own father, who was livid about how these revelations could affect the company's stock value and credibility. Gerald insisted on damage control, urging Maxwell to strike a deal with Celia to ensure her continued discretion. Maxwell balked at such a cold approach, but couldn't entirely dismiss his father's pragmatic concerns. Meanwhile, Victoria watched from the sidelines, torn between pity for Maxwell's predicament and disgust at how the family prioritized their fortune over moral reckoning. In the midst of this storm, Victoria found herself dealing with her own pregnancy complications. Stress took a toll on her body, frequent headaches, high blood pressure, and sleepless nights. Her doctor advised her to minimize anxiety, warning that excessive stress could endanger both her and the baby. This reality check forced Victoria to re-evaluate the situation. As much as she loathed Maxwell's betrayal, she also recognized that continuing to live in a perpetual state of rage would harm her unborn child. During one of the therapy sessions, Dr. Reyes offered a gentle nudge. For your own health, consider what you truly want. Is it to fight for this marriage and move forward, or is it to find closure and move on? Victoria had no easy answer. Maxwell, on his part, tried to demonstrate remorse through tangible actions. He cancelled meetings to accompany Victoria to her prenatal checkups, offered to legally formalize financial and emotional boundaries with Celia, and even suggested stepping down from the company temporarily to focus on his marriage. Though Victoria appreciated the gestures, the wounds were still fresh. It was one thing to see Maxwell's contrition, quite another to accept and trust him again. In private moments, she admitted to herself that she still loved him, even if that love was tangled with resentment. Some nights she lay awake thinking about Aurora, the innocent child at the center of this scandal. Part of her wanted to hate that baby, to see her as the embodiment of Maxwell's betrayal. Another part felt empathy. Aurora was an innocent soul who deserved a father's love, just as her own baby did. The next major upheaval occurred when Celia called Victoria directly. Maxwell had provided Celia's number to Dr. Reyes, hoping for a mediated conversation at some point, but Celia bypassed formalities, perhaps emboldened by her own desperation. When Victoria saw the unknown number flash on her phone, she almost didn't answer. Something made her pick up. Celia's trembling voice filled the line. She apologized for the pain she caused, insisting she never intended to ruin Maxwell's marriage. Tears punctuated her words as she described how she had fallen for Maxwell during a vulnerable time in her life, believing his promises before he vanished to pursue Victoria. I was left alone, pregnant and scared, Celia sobbed. He's helping with money, but it's not enough to feel secure. I want Aurora to know her father. Victoria was speechless. Rage and pity wrestled in her heart. She ended the call abruptly, needing time to process the magnitude of emotions that conversation had stirred. As Victoria relayed the call to Maxwell during their therapy session, Dr. Reyes suggested a three-way conversation with Celia to establish boundaries and expectations. Maxwell hesitated, fearing it would escalate tensions. But Victoria insisted. "This is our reality now," she declared. "We have to figure out how we're going to handle it." In the days leading up to that meeting, Victoria prayed for calm. She knew it would be a test of her emotional fortitude. The session itself took place in Dr. Reyes's office. Celia arrived cradling Aurora, who was now around 4 months old. The baby's soft coos tugged at Victoria's heart, reminding her of her own unborn child. Celia's eyes were red, her posture tense. Maxwell sat between the two women, looking as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Under Dr. Reyes's guidance, the conversation began. Victoria struggled to keep her voice steady as she told Celia how betrayed and humiliated she felt. Celia tearfully recounted how Maxwell had courted her, then vanished. Maxwell, shoulders hunched, apologized repeatedly, admitting his immaturity in handling the situation. Eventually, they discussed the practicalities of child support, visitation, and the emotional ramifications for everyone involved. Celia insisted that Aurora should know her father, and Maxwell agreed to be present in the child's life, provided it didn't end his marriage. The session ended in tears, but also with a tentative framework for how they might move forward. As Victoria left the office, her hand instinctively covered her abdomen. She could feel her own child's fluttering movements, and for a fleeting moment she wondered if there was room in Maxwell's life and heart for both babies. In the weeks that followed, Victoria felt like she was balancing on a thin wire, suspended between two worlds, the family she had dreamed of with Maxwell and the intruding presence of Celia and Aurora. Maxwell attempted to reassure her, yet each time he visited Celia's apartment to see his daughter, Victoria's insecurities flared. She found herself replaying mental images of them, imagining Maxwell holding Aurora with the same gentle reverence he'd once reserved for her alone. This emotional tightrope wore her down. She wasn't sure how much more her heart could take, nor did she know whether the baby she carried would one day share her father's affection with a half-sibling she hadn't even known existed until recently. To complicate matters further, the media caught wind of the scandal. A tabloid published blurry photos of Maxwell and Celia together, branding him as the Playboy heir with a secret love child. Overnight, the story went viral on gossip websites and social media. Paparazzi began loitering around the Pierce mansion, hoping to snag photos of Victoria, Maxwell, or even the elusive Celia. Gerald Pierce unleashed a furious tirade at Maxwell, blaming him for jeopardizing the company's sterling reputation. Victoria felt besieged in her own home, the gates hardly a barrier against the outside world's prying eyes. She took to wearing oversized sunglasses and hats whenever she stepped outside, not wanting her vulnerability to become fodder for tabloids. Maxwell tried to contain the fallout, hiring a crisis management firm to spin the narrative, but the damage was done. Their private pain had become a public spectacle. Amidst the chaos, Victoria experienced a scare. Late one night, she awoke with severe abdominal pains and dizziness. Fear surged through her, believing she might be losing the baby. Maxwell, startled from sleep, rushed her to the hospital. After hours of tests and monitoring, the doctors diagnosed it as stress-induced complications, warning her that any further escalation could threaten the pregnancy. Shaken to her core, Victoria realized her emotional turmoil was taking a tangible toll on her child's well-being. Maxwell, visibly distraught, stayed by her bedside, gripping her hand as tears glistened in his eyes. In that hospital room, overshadowed by fear and regret, they both vowed to prioritize her health and the baby above all else. It was a stark reminder that beyond the scandal, a fragile, precious life depended on them finding some semblance of peace. Following this health scare, Victoria made a pivotal decision. She would temporarily step away from the public eye and retreat to her family's old house in San Diego. Though the home was modest compared to the mansion, it offered a sense of familiarity and solace she desperately needed. Maxwell agreed it was best for her and the baby. He promised to handle the media frenzy in Los Angeles while Victoria could focus on resting and regaining her emotional balance. She found herself in the bedroom she had once shared with her younger sister, memories swirling the bunk beds, the glow in the dark stars on the ceiling. The humility of the setting contrasted sharply with her current life, yet it brought a strange sense of comfort. Each morning, she took a walk around the neighborhood, greeting old neighbors, inhaling the scent of jasmine from backyard gardens. Here, she wasn't the pregnant wife of a millionaire with a scandal. She was just Victoria Caldwell, trying to hold herself together for her unborn child. Maxwell visited her every weekend, driving down on Fridays to spend quality time. These visits were bittersweet. On one hand, she longed for his presence, for the love they once shared. On the other, she resented the betrayal that had led her to flee her own home. During one visit, he brought a plush teddy bear meant for the baby, tears pooling in his eyes as he apologized once more for the pain he caused. "I can't change the past," he said, voice choked with emotion. "All I can do is prove I'm still worthy of being your husband and our baby's father." Moved by his sincerity, Victoria allowed herself a moment of hope. Perhaps, with time and honesty, the fractures in their marriage could be repaired. But the spectre of Aurora lingered, along with the knowledge that Celia was still very much in the picture, reliant on Maxwell's financial and emotional support. The turning point came when Victoria's mother, Patricia Caldwell, sat her down in the cozy kitchen where Victoria had once done homework. Patricia was a gentle, pragmatic soul, someone who had known hardships and persevered. Over a cup of tea, Patricia gently touched Victoria's hand. "I'm not telling you what to do," she began, "but remember that people make mistakes, some bigger than others. If Maxwell is genuinely remorseful and willing to do the hard work, it might be worth giving him a chance. But you have to decide if you can truly forgive him. Without forgiveness, you'll never find peace." The words struck Victoria deeply. Forgiveness was a daunting challenge. Yet she recognized that harboring perpetual anger would eat away at her, harming both her and her baby. Perhaps, she reasoned, there was a path forward, though it would be fraught with emotional landmines. Slowly, Victoria began easing back into therapy sessions, this time with Maxwell joining remotely if he couldn't make the drive. Dr. Reyes guided them through trust-building exercises, encouraging open communication. Maxwell shared updates about his interactions with Aurora, who was growing rapidly and starting to babble. Victoria found herself experiencing a complicated mix of jealousy and tenderness. She resented the child's existence, but also felt drawn to her innocence. As her own belly expanded, she couldn't help but empathize with Celia's struggles of single parenthood. The emotional knots were far from untangled, but therapy allowed Victoria and Maxwell to have honest conversations without descending into accusations and tears. Through the process, Victoria discovered a hidden reservoir of strength within herself. She was fighting for her marriage and for the future of her child. Meanwhile, Celia's role remained ambiguous. She was grateful for Maxwell's financial support, but made it clear she didn't want to be a perpetual secret. Some nights, Maxwell and Victoria would argue because Celia wanted to attend certain public events, believing Aurora deserved recognition as a peeress. "She's not just some footnote in your legacy," Celia had insisted in an email Maxwell shared with Victoria. Victoria bristled at the idea, still reeling from the emotional fallout. But Dr. Reyes pointed out that from Celia's perspective, she was only advocating for her child's rightful place in Maxwell's life. This revelation weighed on Victoria, reminding her that while Celia might have been complicit in an affair, she was also a mother fighting for her child. It was a sobering realization that the situation had layers, each one more complex than the last. As the months progressed, Victoria's due date approached. She decided to return to Los Angeles, partly because she wanted to deliver the baby in a world-class hospital, and partly because she felt more prepared to face the challenges ahead. Maxwell welcomed her back to the mansion with a newly decorated nursery, painted in soft neutrals. He seemed genuinely committed to supporting her pregnancy, ensuring she had the best medical team, nutritionists, and even a mindfulness coach. The paparazzi presence had waned, moving on to fresher scandals, which offered a semblance of privacy. Victoria remained cautious, but she allowed herself to feel a hint of excitement about the impending birth. Somewhere in her heart, she prayed that the love they had might not be entirely lost. The baby, a boy, whom they'd decided to name Henry, arrived on a rainy afternoon in early spring. The labor was long and grueling, and Victoria felt surges of pain like she'd never experienced. Maxwell stayed by her side, whispering encouragement, tears in his eyes when he finally heard Henry's first cry. In that moment, a wave of overwhelming love washed over Victoria. She held Henry to her chest, marveling at the fragile life she had nurtured. All the betrayals and scandals receded into the background as she focused on her son. For a few blissful hours, it was just their mother, father, and child bonded in a cocoon of unconditional love. The peaceful haze of new parenthood lasted only a few days. When Celia found out Henry had been born, she sent a message unexpected but somewhat compassionate, congratulating Victoria and Maxwell. She even included a photo of Aurora, now toddling around and giggling. "Perhaps our children can meet someday," the note read. Victoria felt a jolt of fear and curiosity. Her instincts rebelled against the idea, but another part of her recognized that Henry and Aurora were half-siblings. Denying their bond might not be fair or sustainable in the long run. Over the next few weeks, Victoria was too overwhelmed by sleepless nights, feedings, and pediatric appointments to dwell on the matter. Yet it loomed in the background, an inevitable conversation about blending these fractured pieces of family. As Henry turned 3 months old, Victoria and Maxwell had adapted to an exhausting yet fulfilling rhythm of parenthood: night feeds, diaper changes, colic episodes, and fleeting moments of pure wonder. During one of their therapy sessions, Dr. Rise brought up the possibility of introducing Aurora to Henry. "What are your long-term visions of family?" she asked gently. Victoria hesitated, uncertain if her heart could handle the sight of Maxwell doting on Aurora in the same way he doted on Henry. But she also sensed that continuing to avoid Aurora was like ignoring an elephant in the room. Maxwell, for his part, voiced a desire for Henry to know his sister, emphasizing that Aurora was his responsibility too. It was a tangled knot of fear, jealousy, and moral obligation. Eventually, Victoria agreed to a carefully orchestrated meeting at a neutral location, a child-friendly cafe with an enclosed playground. Celia arrived first, holding Aurora's tiny hand. The little girl had wispy brown hair and big, curious eyes. Victoria's heart thundered as she watched Aurora toddle around, giggling at the bright plastic slides. Then Maxwell appeared, carrying Henry in a baby carrier, with Victoria clutching the diaper bag. The atmosphere was fraught with tension, but also an undercurrent of hope. As Aurora waddled closer, Victoria braced herself for an emotional impact. Maxwell kneeled down, letting Aurora peek into Henry's carrier. The little girl giggled, pointing at him. Henry, barely aware, stared up with wide eyes. Despite the swirl of adult conflict, the children shared a simple, instinctive connection, a small symbol of innocence amidst the chaos. Watching them, Victoria felt tears pool in her eyes. A spark of compassion ignited in her chest, reminding her that these two babies were blameless, each deserving of love and unity. The meeting ended without major drama. Victoria was civil, Celia was cautious, and Maxwell tried his best to navigate the emotional landmines. Afterward, Victoria felt simultaneously drained and oddly at peace. She realized that while the path ahead was far from smooth, she was capable of finding moments of grace in the midst of turmoil. Over the ensuing months, these visits became a rare but consistent occurrence. Celia remained firm that she wanted Aurora to have a normal upbringing, but she also respected Victoria's boundaries, coordinating schedules through Maxwell and Dr. Reyes. Through it all, Maxwell sought to prove his loyalty to Victoria, no longer hiding or sneaking around, but openly communicating each step he took. Gradually, her resentment toward Aurora subsided, replaced by an acceptance that the child was an extension of Maxwell and deserved love. Back at Pierce Real Estate Holdings, Maxwell contended with the fallout of his scandal. The board questioned his leadership. Some investors expressed concern, and a proposed European expansion stalled amid swirling rumors. Gerald Pierce stepped in with measured support, acknowledging Maxwell's personal challenges, but also warning him that the business world was unforgiving. Nevertheless, Maxwell persisted, determined to demonstrate that his family life wouldn't hamper the company's success. Through strategic partnerships, charitable endeavors, and a renewed focus on transparent leadership, he began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. In a surprising twist, Maxwell even invited Celia to attend a family-friendly charity event, though more for Aurora's sake than anything else, signaling a willingness to publicly acknowledge his daughter without shame. Victoria, watching from the sidelines, found herself wavering between pride in Maxwell's courage and lingering pangs of insecurity. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of their lives. Dr. Reyes marveled at how far they'd come from the early, acrimonious sessions. Victoria worked tirelessly to forgive Maxwell, a gradual process marked by setbacks and breakthroughs. She learned to articulate her feelings without lapsing into rage, while Maxwell learned to listen without becoming defensive. They discussed everything from co-parenting structures to financial arrangements and how to handle future holidays. Sometimes it felt like they were planning a complicated merger rather than a family dynamic, but each step brought a tiny measure of healing. Victoria noticed that with each passing month, she felt less of the razor-sharp anger that once dominated her thoughts. The love that had once bound them was still there, tattered but not entirely severed. On Henry's first birthday, Victoria decided to do something that even she hadn't anticipated. She invited Celia and Aurora to the party. It was a small gathering, just a handful of friends, Samantha included, and immediate family. Celia arrived nervously, holding Aurora's hand. The tension in the air was palpable at first, but Henry's joyful babbling and Aurora's delighted laughter soon punctured the awkwardness. Victoria caught herself smiling as she watched Aurora try to help Henry open his presents, babbling words only a toddler could decipher. For the first time, Victoria sensed not just a grudging tolerance, but a genuine warmth stirring within her. She took Celia aside, and they had a cautious but honest conversation. "I'm not saying we'll ever be friends," Victoria began, "but our children are siblings. If they can love each other, maybe we can learn to at least respect each other." Celia nodded, eyes brimming with relief. In that moment, the seeds of a fragile but vital partnership were sown. As time moved on, life became a mosaic of complexities. Victoria and Maxwell settled into a routine that included Henry's daycare schedules, occasional blended family outings, and relentless board meetings. The scandal, once front-page news, slowly receded from the tabloids, replaced by newer controversies. public interest waned, and investors regained confidence in Maxwell as he delivered strong quarterly earnings for Pierce Real Estate Holdings. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself juggling motherhood and the possibility of returning to her advertising career. Some days were harder than others. Waves of old pain revisited her unexpectedly, a memory of the night she discovered Maxwell's secret, or the sight of an old photograph from their honeymoon. But each time she reached for the coping mechanisms Dr. Reyes had taught her, leaning on the slow, steady process of healing. One evening, as Henry slept soundly in his crib, Maxwell and Victoria sat together on the living room couch. The lights were dim, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner. Maxwell tentatively placed his hand over hers. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope you can see how hard I've tried to make amends," he said softly. Victoria turned to him, her eyes reflecting both tenderness and lingering hurt. "I see it," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm just still scared sometimes. Scared you'll hurt me again." Maxwell gently pulled her into an embrace. "I know. I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I've changed." In that moment, Victoria allowed herself the luxury of leaning into his warmth, feeling the rise and fall of his chest. Perhaps love wasn't about perfection, but about enduring the trials that life hurled at them. Over the next year, little milestones underscored their progress. Henry took his first steps across the living room, while Aurora giggled in delight on a playdate arranged by Celia and Victoria. Celia began dating someone new, an entrepreneur she met through a mutual friend. Victoria felt an inexplicable sense of relief, knowing Celia's focus wasn't solely on Maxwell. Yet, an undercurrent of tension always lingered, as though a single misstep could unravel the fragile equilibrium they'd built. Still, through therapy and a collective willingness to grow, they managed to navigate the labyrinthine path of a blended, unconventional family. 2 years after Henry's birth, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with less spectacle, but no less joy. Maxwell clutched her in a tight embrace when she revealed the positive test. They told Samantha and Celia, now an unexpected ally in the domain of motherhood, who both expressed genuine happiness for them. The new baby arrived months later, a girl they named Eleanor, after Victoria's grandmother. Holding Eleanor in her arms, Victoria felt a sweet, poignant ache. She was forging a family with a man who had once shattered her trust, yet their love had survived. In the quiet hush of the hospital room, with Maxwell's adoring gaze fixed on Eleanor, Victoria felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Looking back on the journey, Victoria could hardly recognize the naive bride who once believed in a perfect marriage untouched by secrets. She had learned that real love was messy, scarred by betrayals and shaped by redemption. Maxwell had evolved from a reckless millionaire heir to a man humbled by his mistakes, committed to being a better husband and father. Their children, Henry, Eleanor, and Aurora, symbolized both the pain of the past and the hope of the future. Though life was far from the pristine fairy tale Victoria had once envisioned, it had gained a depth and meaning she never thought possible. In the end, it wasn't the illusions of perfection that bound them together, but their shared resilience in the face of adversity, forging a fragile yet unbreakable bond. And so, Victoria's story stands as a testament to the power of forgiveness and the resilience of a heart willing to heal. The path she navigated was strewn with betrayal, heartbreak, and uncertainty, but also moments of compassion, unity, and profound love. Through countless therapy sessions, raw confrontations, and acts of courage, she found a way to create a life that honored both her own worth and the innocent children at the heart of it all.
A quiet suburb, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a secret that threatened to split one family forever. It all began on a stormy night when Mark Anderson, seemingly the perfect husband, let his alluring mistress step into his pregnant wife's bedroom and into her bed. By the time dawn broke, flashing police lights flooded the driveway, and neighbors peered through windows in disbelief. No one could imagine how a once ordinary couple fell into such chaos. But within these walls lay hidden confessions, desperate betrayals, and heart-wrenching choices that would test loyalty, break trust, and leave everyone asking, how could it ever have come to this? Mark Anderson stared at the white picket fence in front of his modest suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The day was sunny, and a light breeze ruffled the neatly manicured lawn. He always took pride in appearances. He liked knowing everything was in its rightful place, reflecting an outward image of success and respectability. His wife Sarah often teased him about his perfectionist streak. In fact, it was one of the things she had found so endearing when they first met back in college. Their romance felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. Long strolls by the campus lake, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and shared laughter that echoed through dorm hallways. Mark was diligent, always rechecking his notes and color-coding everything in his backpack, while Sarah was more laid back, bringing a sense of warmth and spontaneity to his otherwise structured world. They graduated together, he with a degree in business administration, she in elementary education. Soon after, they were married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by family and a few close friends. It seemed they were destined for a happy life, ticking off all the boxes: stable jobs, a well-furnished home, and plans for children. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic snapshot, a subtle tension had begun to settle in. As the years progressed, Mark found himself increasingly restless, obsessing over career goals, finances, and the desire for more excitement. Sarah noticed changes in him. Little things like how he lingered on his phone too often, or occasionally arrived home late with half-hearted excuses. She was patient, chalking it up to stress. After all, Mark had always been ambitious, and it made sense he might be feeling the pressure at work. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, Mark's reaction was polite and supportive, though it lacked the unbridled enthusiasm she had expected. He hugged her, whispered reassuring words, but there was a distance in his eyes. Instead of celebrating, she found herself chasing him for each prenatal appointment, reminding him of the baby's progress. The more she tried to draw him in, the more he seemed to drift. She told herself it was a passing phase, that once the baby was born, Mark would realize the beautiful miracle they were about to share. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah felt a pang of worry, a whisper that warned her not all was right. Real trouble took root one evening when Sarah's best friend, Jessica Lee, visited for dinner. Jessica, a sharp-eyed, warm-hearted woman with a knack for reading people, discreetly pulled Sarah aside after noticing Mark's odd behavior. He was jumpy, his laughter forced, and his phone never left his sight. Jessica offered her concerns gently, but Sarah brushed them off, not wanting to believe that the man she'd built a life with might be hiding something. If anything, she blamed Mark's anxious state on the responsibilities piling up. But Mark was in fact drowning in secrets, ones that would threaten the very foundation of his marriage. He knew it, he felt it, yet he couldn't stop what was happening. That was the cruel irony of his situation. The very qualities that had once driven him to be the responsible, overachieving husband were now pushing him to take risks he never dreamed himself capable of. While Sarah napped early in the evenings or read baby manuals in her rocking chair, Mark was scrolling through messages that made his heart pound in anticipation. Messages from a woman who offered him a sense of thrill he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Carla Rodriguez, and she worked in the same office building as Mark, though in a different department. She was witty, confident, and possessed a magnetism that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Everyone at the office talked about Carla's style, her flamboyant choice of bright pencil skirts, and the way she commanded attention during team presentations. Mark had seen her in passing, but only after being assigned to a joint project had they begun to speak. He'd noticed how she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes locked onto his when they conversed. Slowly their friendly exchanges morphed into stolen glances, then to flirtatious banter over coffee. Carla knew Mark was married. He never hid that. She even knew Sarah was pregnant. But from the moment Carla placed her hand on Mark's arm one evening during overtime, gently brushing against him, he found himself responding. He was at a precipice caught between guilt and a longing to escape from the monotony he blamed on domestic life. Carla, too, was escaping from something her own lonely nights and a string of failed relationships. They provided each other solace, a forbidden escape from their real lives. Their meetings were carefully orchestrated. Mark would fake a late work session or say he was meeting a client. Carla pretended she was staying behind to finish a report. They found dark corners in parking lots, eventually renting cheap motel rooms on the outskirts of town. Each time, Mark was sure guilt would consume him, but it never quite did lust, and adrenaline overshadowed everything. But the affair came at a cost. Mark's finances, once neatly balanced, began to suffer under secretive dinners and gifts for Carla. He found himself withdrawing from Sarah's bank account, without telling her, always with the silent reassurance that he'd make it up later. He also neglected small household tasks. Sarah, now 6 months pregnant, found herself climbing step stools to change light bulbs and dragging groceries into the house alone. The tension between husband and wife continued to escalate. Sarah was frustrated and exhausted, but she tried to remain understanding. She never fully admitted to herself that Mark's distance might signify an affair. After all, he'd been loyal and devoted all the years she had known him. It was impossible, unthinkable, to consider he would betray her in such a way, especially now that they were expecting a child. Instead, she believed he was going through a personal crisis, perhaps a fear of fatherhood. Sarah confided in Jessica about her suspicions and her desire to keep the marriage intact, no matter the challenges. Then Mark made a fateful choice one Friday night. While Sarah was away at her mother's house, he invited Carla to dinner at his own home. It was a step too far, and he knew it. But Carla had teased him, saying she wanted to see how he lived. That single curiosity overshadowed every warning bell in Mark's head. He assured himself it was just dinner, just a quick look at the house, and then she'd leave. But the moment Carla stepped through the door, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her figure, Mark knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. Carla marveled at the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, snapshots of Mark and Sarah at scenic spots around Colorado. Even the ultrasound image pinned on the refrigerator. Despite it all, Carla maintained an air of detachment, as though all these tokens of Mark's married life were mere props. Yet there was a glimmer in her eyes, something like envy. Perhaps a realization that Sarah's existence was painfully real and not just some story Mark told. But she said nothing, and Mark pretended not to notice the flicker of discomfort in his mistress's gaze. After dinner, Mark opened a bottle of wine. Carla drank, swirling the red liquid in her glass, leaning against the kitchen counter, with a playful grin. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mark, consumed by his infatuation, felt the weight of what he was doing in that moment. If Sarah came home early, if a neighbor saw something, or if Jessica decided to drop by unannounced, everything would come crashing down. But Mark brushed aside the fear and let the night's temptations drown out any lingering decency he once had. By the time Carla left, it was nearly midnight, and Mark was too intoxicated to notice he'd left behind incriminating details. A wine-stained glass on the table, a faint whiff of Carla's perfume on the couch. He cleaned up most of it the next morning, but not everything could be erased. Sarah returned the next day to find Mark unusually jittery. He barely met her eyes when she mentioned her overnight trip, merely offering a distracted smile and a quick peck on her forehead before returning to his laptop. Not one to pry, Sarah decided to let him be. Over the next week, though, she noticed more oddities. A grocery receipt with items she hadn't purchased, a new brand of perfume lingering in the bathroom. Small tears in the living room curtains, as if someone had tugged them aside in haste. Her instincts told her something was off, but each time she tried to confront Mark, he feigned ignorance or brushed off her concerns as pregnancy hormones. Sarah, unwilling to ignite a confrontation, let it slide, though her intuition screamed that she needed to dig deeper. She wondered if she was being paranoid. Jessica urged her to keep her eyes open, but also encouraged her not to jump to conclusions. Sarah's mother, Linda, who was unaware of her son-in-law's changed behavior, simply advised Sarah to rest and not overthink. But the facade was growing thinner by the day. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly with messages he refused to open in Sarah's presence. He hid credit card bills and spent evenings out under vague explanations. Each lie stacked upon the next, forging a precarious tower that threatened to collapse with the slightest shift. By the 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah's frustration peaked. She confronted Mark one evening. When she asked him point blank if there was someone else, he scoffed, calling the very suggestion absurd. He even grew indignant, accusing Sarah of not trusting him after all these years. She apologized, tears stinging her eyes, and retreated to the bedroom with a knot of dread in her stomach. It was only after she heard him slamming cupboards in the kitchen that she realized how truly disconnected they had become. Meanwhile, Carla continued her pursuit of Mark, growing bolder. She sent messages at all hours, demanded more time together, and even hinted at wanting Mark to leave Sarah. Mark, torn between his unborn child and the lust he felt for Carla, found himself buried in stress. Some part of him, however dormant, still cared for Sarah. But he couldn't break off his entanglement with Carla either. He told himself he was trapped in a scenario with no easy escape. Each day felt like stepping on thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack. That was how things stood when Sarah planned another trip to her mother's place. Linda was having minor surgery, and Sarah wanted to help for a couple of days. Mark recognized an opportunity. He promised Sarah he would manage the house and take care of everything. In reality, he was already anticipating Carla's company. He envisioned an evening free from prying neighbors or suspicious looks. This time it felt thrillingly dangerous. He made a mental note to hide all traces properly. But Mark failed to understand the nature of secrets. They breed bigger lies, deeper guilt, and an inevitable unraveling. And that unraveling was about to accelerate much faster than even Carla anticipated. Carla arrived on a rainy evening. Mark welcomed her with a hesitant smile, but she brushed his concern aside and draped her trench coat over the chair. They shared a meal that Mark had ordered and then settled in the living room. If there was any sense of guilt, Mark buried it beneath the facade of a charming host. Carla, for her part, seemed at ease. She wandered the house, studying family photos, with a critical eye lingering especially on the ultrasound image Sarah had pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. During dinner, Carla revealed a side Mark had rarely seen, a near-obsessive curiosity about his wife's life. She asked about Sarah's routines, her profession, her due date. Mark tried to respond, vaguely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla's eyes sparkled with a strange intensity when she heard that Sarah was in her 3rd trimester, as if calculating how to use this information for her own advantage. After dinner, Mark put away the plates and let Carla roam. She ended up in the master bedroom, admiring the pale blue walls and white curtains that Sarah had painstakingly chosen. The bed was neatly made, and a plush teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's friend Jessica, sat by the pillows. Carla ran her fingers along the comforter, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really living a double life, aren't you?" She teased, her tone somewhere between humor and contempt. A loving husband by day, a wild lover by night. Mark winced but mustered a forced grin. He closed the bedroom door behind him, as though trying to keep prying eyes away from the intimacy of this space. Standing next to Carla, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions: excitement, revulsion, guilt, and a strange relief that she was here at all. The evening unfolded slowly, each passing hour, an accumulation of unspoken tensions. Carla had carried an overnight bag with her, just in case, she'd said. Mark convinced himself she would leave before midnight, but as the clock approached 1 a.m., they were still tangled in conversation and half-empty wine glasses. The rainstorm outside battered the windows, making the prospect of driving home unappealing. Carla feigned helplessness. "I can't drive in this. Let me stay over." And with that, a line was crossed. Mark hesitated. Should he set her up in the guest room? Was that too blatant a sign of guilt? But Carla's cunning charm won. She tiptoed into the master bedroom, letting the overhead light cast shadows across her silhouette. Mark, helpless to resist, followed. Outside, the storm raged on, oblivious to the tempest brewing within these walls. Thus Carla ended up sleeping in Sarah's bed. The place where a pregnant wife should have found comfort and rest was now occupied by the woman who had seduced her husband. Mark tossed and turned throughout the night, haunted by the gravity of his betrayal. In fleeting moments of lucidity, he almost leaped out of bed to make Carla leave. But each time he tried, Carla would pull him back with a whisper or a touch, and the swirling mixture of fear and desire imprisoned him. A part of Mark believed he might still keep everything hidden, that come sunrise Carla would slip away, and he'd erase all traces. Sarah wouldn't be back for another day. He had time to wash the sheets, tidy up the wine glasses, and stash away Carla's belongings. But fate had other plans. Plans that neither Mark nor Carla could have predicted. The next morning, a watery sun struggled to pierce the storm clouds. Mark stirred early groggy and disoriented. Carla was curled up on Sarah's side of the bed, her hair splayed across the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding at the thought of all that needed to be done, cleaning, changing sheets, ensuring no neighbor had spotted Carla's car. He tiptoed around the house, picking up her jacket from the living room sofa, gathering wine glasses and disposing of them in the outside trash bin. As he wrestled the trash can to the curb, Mark froze. At the far end of the block, a police cruiser crept around, the bend lights flashing, but sirens off. An immediate jolt of panic shot through his veins. Had something happened to Sarah? Did they come bearing tragic news? He looked around, scanning for any sign of an accident or trouble in the neighborhood. But the cruiser slowly rolled to a stop right in front of his driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Paige Morales and Officer Adam Thompson, both with stern expressions. Mark swallowed hard as they approached. This couldn't possibly be about Carla, right? They wouldn't have any reason to suspect infidelity. Unless Carla had a past Mark knew nothing about. The possibility flickered in his mind, sowing anxiety. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trying to maintain composure. "Good morning," Officer Morales said, tipping her head in greeting. "We received a report about a disturbance in this area early this morning. We're checking to ensure everything's okay." "A disturbance?" Mark repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. A neighbor reported unusual noises, shouting. Maybe an argument late last night. They also saw a car parked out front that they didn't recognize." Mark's mind raced. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was known for her vigilance, especially at odd hours. Perhaps she had seen Carla arrive or heard them talking. He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to trouble you, officer. My wife is out of town, and I was just... Well, I might have had the television too loud last night. No arguments, though. Nothing else going on." Officer Thompson scrutinized Mark's expression. "Is there anyone else in the house with you right now?" "Mr. Anderson?" Mark felt a twist in his gut. A friend stayed over. She was caught in the storm, and..." Before he could finish, Carla emerged in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's robes. The color drained from Mark's face as the officers turned their attention to her. Carla's eyes flicked between them, trying to feign calm, but clearly unsettled by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. "Good morning," she said, attempting a polite nod. Officer Morales studied Carla's attire, then exchanged a glance with her partner. "And you are..." Carla's response was quick, lacking the usual confidence. "Carla Rodriguez. I'm a colleague of Mark's. He was kind enough to let me crash here because of the storm." An awkward silence followed. The officers seemed unconvinced. Mark's posture stiffened, sweat beading on his forehead. Then Officer Thompson asked if they could step inside to talk further. Mark hesitated, fearing the officers might discover remnants of the affair, but refusing entry might look suspicious. Reluctantly, he led them into the living room, where Carla perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. The questions continued basic inquiries about the alleged disturbance, how Carla ended up here, whether Mark's wife was aware. Each query felt like a jab at Mark's fragile house of lies. He concocted half-truths, carefully sidestepping the real nature of Carla's presence. Meanwhile, Carla remained mostly silent, occasionally offering affirmations to Mark's statements. It seemed the officers weren't entirely convinced, but they had no concrete evidence of any crime. They reminded Mark and Carla to respect neighborhood noise ordinances and to be mindful of suspicious activity. Officer Morales handed Mark her card, suggesting he call if anything came up, her eyes lingering on him, as though warning she wasn't fully buying their story. Just when Mark thought they would leave, Carla's phone rang, blasting a shrill ring through the tense atmosphere. She scrambled to silence it, but Officer Thompson motioned for her to answer. Glancing at the caller ID, Carla paled. She stepped into the next room. Voice low. After the call, Carla re-emerged, looking shaken. Officer Thompson pressed, "Everything all right?" "Ms. Rodriguez." Carla forced a smile. "Just a family matter," she said, but her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. Sensing the tension, Officer Morales decided to wrap up. She cast one final evaluating look over the scene, then pivoted toward the front door. The moment the officers left, Mark turned to Carla, ready to ask what was happening. But before he could open his mouth, Carla's phone chimed again. Another call. Carla stared at the screen and rejected it, exhaling shakily. "What's going on?" Mark demanded, heart still pounding from the near exposure of their affair. Carla brushed past him, grabbing her jacket and slipping into her shoes. "I have to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I'll explain later." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark alone in a house that now felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal and suspicion. Sarah would be home soon, and he had an endless list of cover-ups to manage. But a deeper dread gnawed at him. Carla was clearly entangled in something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and it was only a matter of time before it all caught up to them, before the next knock on the door wouldn't be as benign as a noise complaint. With Carla gone, Mark raced to erase every trace of her presence. He stripped the bed, replacing the sheets with fresh linen. He collected the empty wine bottle and glasses, tossed them in the recycling bin, and opened all the windows to air out the lingering perfume. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down counters, and even mopped the kitchen floor, desperately trying to rid the house of any memory of her. As he worked, his mind replayed the scene with the police officers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Morales and Officer Thompson didn't entirely believe him. Their questions had probed deeper than a simple noise complaint. Yet what choice did Mark have but to lie? Telling the truth would mean forfeiting everything: his marriage, his home, his soon-to-be fatherhood. An hour later, Sarah called to let him know her mother was stable after the minor surgery, and that she'd be returning home by evening. Mark pretended everything was normal, forcing a light-hearted tone as he asked if she needed anything from the store. After he hung up, he crumpled onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The pit of guilt in his stomach felt bottomless. Was it worth it, this double life, for a fleeting affair that offered excitement but left him feeling hollow? By mid-afternoon, Mark couldn't ignore his anxiety about Carla. He texted her multiple times. Mark, 1:03 p.m. Are you okay? Mark, 1:10 p.m. Please let me know what's going on. Mark, 2:05 p.m. Carla. I'm worried. The police thing really shook me up. No response. The phone remained silent, each passing minute, feeding Mark's paranoia. He started recalling random details from their time together. Things she'd hinted at, questionable friends, financial troubles. A mention of an ex-boyfriend who was dangerous. He'd never pressed her for details, preferring their relationship remain an escape without real-world burdens. Now he regretted his willful ignorance. By 5 p.m., Mark heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. He hurriedly got up, plastering on a smile, as though he'd spent the day doing mundane chores. She walked in slowly, her baby bump prominent under a loose-fitting dress. She looked exhausted, but relieved to be home. Without a word, she set her bag down and let Mark wrap her in a hug. "How's Mum?" he asked softly. "She's fine," Sarah said. "The surgery went well and she's recovering. I just need some rest." Together they made a simple dinner, Mark fussing over Sarah, trying to be attentive to her needs. She seemed grateful, but also distant, as though sensing something was amiss. As they ate, Sarah looked at him with eyes that flickered between love and suspicion. "Mark, was everything okay here the last couple of days?" "You seem tense," she ventured. He took a sip of water to stall. "Just work stuff," he lied. "Some deadlines?" She nodded and let the subject drop. Mark exhaled. For one brief moment, he believed he might still salvage things if Carla would stay away, if the police never returned, if he could bury this chapter of his life forever. But secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most brutal fashion, and that reckoning was closer than Mark realized. Late that night, while Sarah slept fitfully, her pregnancy making it hard to find a comfortable position. Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the last 24 hours churned in his mind. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, desperately checking if Carla had finally texted him. Nothing. His anxiety climbed. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Mark scrolled through social media. He searched Carla's name, rummaging through any clues that might explain her sudden panic. He found her profile inactive, last updated weeks ago. As he scrolled further, he stumbled upon a post from a friend of Carla's referencing a certain mess Carla was in. There were no details, just cryptic comments and concerned replies. Unease prickled through him. He decided to do what he should have done from the beginning, look up Carla Rodriguez in public records. Accessing an online search, he discovered a few results indicating minor legal issues in her past. A DUI charge from years ago, a civil dispute over unpaid rent. Nothing that jumped out as immediately dangerous. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something heavier was in play. He slept fitfully, waking at dawn to Sarah's gentle stirring. She pressed a hand to her belly and turned to him, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, they smiled at each other, a brief slice of normalcy. Mark tried to cling to that moment, to pretend they were still the couple who had once laughed on the campus lake. But the outside world wouldn't allow it. As Sarah headed to the shower, Mark's phone buzzed an unknown number. He swallowed hard and answered. "Mark," a voice whispered urgently. "Carla." "Thank God. Where have you been?" Mark scurried out of bed and closed the bedroom door behind him. "I can't talk long," Carla said, her voice hoarse. "I'm in trouble, Mark. I owe money to some people. Dangerous people. The police showed up because they were tipped off about something. It's not about us. Not exactly. But if they connect any dots..." Her voice trailed off. Mark felt his stomach churn. "Carla, what exactly did you do?" A pause. "It's complicated. I made some bad decisions. Now I need a place to stay, just for a few nights. My landlord kicked me out. I have nowhere else to go." Mark braced himself against the wall. No, Carla. You can't come here." "My wife, I have no one else to ask." She pleaded, her tone verging on desperation. "Please, I'll be discreet. I'll stay out of sight. I promise." He closed his eyes, the guilt mixing with dread. Sarah was in her final months of pregnancy, and the last thing he wanted was to endanger her or cause more stress. But Carla's frantic plea tugged at him. In some twisted sense, he felt responsible for her predicament, as if his affair had pushed her to the brink. "Let me think," he muttered finally. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The drama spiraled further out of control, and with each passing moment, Mark dug himself deeper into a pit of moral compromise. That morning, Sarah left for a routine prenatal checkup. She invited Mark to come along, but he claimed he had an important virtual meeting for work. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched her drive away alone, all while he contemplated how to handle his mistress's precarious situation. He called Carla back and arranged to meet her at a nearby diner, a rundown place that rarely attracted attention. When he arrived, he found her in a corner booth wearing a hoodie, sunglasses perched on her head, her face drawn and tired. She looked up at him with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for meeting me," she murmured. Mark slid into the booth, grimacing at the sticky tabletop. "Tell me what's going on." Carla recounted her story in fragments. She owed a large sum to a local loan shark connected to her ex, and they'd threatened her. She had tried to pay them back, but fell behind. The previous night, she'd gotten a tip that the police had been contacted, perhaps to bring her in for questioning. She believed the noise complaint was a ruse, an attempt to locate her. Mark's head spun. This was more than a simple affair gone awry. Carla was ensnared in a criminal web, and he was now on the periphery of it. "You can't stay at my house," he repeated firmly. "It's too risky. Sarah would kill me." Carla's eyes glistened. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Just a few nights. I can keep a low profile. If anyone asks, say I'm a friend from work, going through a breakup." Mark thought of Sarah's growing suspicion, the near miss with the police, the unborn child who needed a stable home. Every logical fibre in his being screamed at him to cut Carla off. Yet he felt a twisted sense of responsibility. He'd let Carla into his life. He'd ignored every red flag. Now she was pleading for help, and part of him couldn't bear to leave her in danger. Against all better judgment, he agreed to house her in the guest room for a single night. Carla's eyes brightened with gratitude. Mark cursed himself silently, knowing he was only tightening the noose around his neck. That evening, Mark lied to Sarah again. He said a colleague was in town for business and needed a place to crash for the night. Sarah, although surprised, did not protest. She was preoccupied with back pains and a baby that kicked relentlessly. Besides, Mark had rarely brought colleagues home, so she assumed it was a genuine favor. Carla arrived late, wearing a cap and oversized clothes to avoid recognition. Mark ushered her into the guest room, quickly praying the neighbors wouldn't notice. Sarah was in bed reading a pregnancy book. Mark told her he'd be up soon, then crept to the guest room where Carla lingered by the door. "You have to stay in here," he hissed. "Do not step out unless it's absolutely necessary. Sarah can't see you. She'll recognize you from the police visit." Carla nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand. Thank you, Mark." He closed the door and returned to the master bedroom. Nerves frayed. Sarah was yawning, complaining of back pain. Mark sat beside her, gently massaging her lower spine in an attempt to soothe her. The moment felt painfully ironic. Here he was tending to his pregnant wife, while his mistress hid in the next room. Every stroke of his hand reminded him how far he'd fallen. That night, Sarah drifted off after some time, but Mark couldn't sleep. He heard every squeak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement from Carla's room. Around midnight, a text arrived on his phone. "I'm so sorry for all this. Carla." He stared at the message, feeling a twinge of pity. After a moment's thought, he tapped out a response. "Just stay put. We'll sort this out tomorrow." Morning dawned bright and tense. Sarah rose early to prepare for a follow-up doctor's appointment. Mark feigned a headache, offering to stay behind just in case his colleague needed help. Sarah seemed unconvinced, suspicion flickering in her gaze, but she gathered her belongings and left anyway. With Sarah gone, Mark hurried to Carla's room, only to find her asleep in a rumpled bed, eyes puffy from crying. He woke her gently, offering coffee. She told him she'd be out of his hair by afternoon, having made some arrangements to lay low at a friend's house. Mark felt relief wash over him. If Carla left for good, he might salvage some semblance of normalcy. But just as Carla was preparing to slip out, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Mark's heart lodged in his throat. Not again. He peeked out a window. Officer Morales stood on the porch, hand poised to knock again. Turning, he found Carla in the hallway. Terror etched across her face. "Go to the kitchen," he commanded under his breath. "Hide." As Carla disappeared, Mark inhaled sharply and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Officer Morales, what brings you here?" She looked at him with a stony expression, stepping forward, prompting him to let her inside. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Carla Rodriguez." Mark's blood ran cold. "Carla, I told you we worked together, and she stayed over because of the storm." Officer Morales nodded slowly. "We have information suggesting Ms. Rodriguez may be involved in illegal activities. There's a possibility she might contact you again, given your relationship. We'd like your cooperation." Swallowing hard, Mark feigned ignorance. "Look, I don't know what Carla's done. I've barely spoken to her since the other day. She hasn't contacted me." The officer gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you hear from her, you'll let us know immediately, right?" "Of course," Mark said, managing a nod. Officer Morales seemed unconvinced, but left her card again, instructing him to call if Carla showed up. As she walked out, she let her gaze linger in the foyer, as though sensing someone else's presence. Mark held his breath until she finally exited. Heart racing, he rushed back to the kitchen where Carla was crouched behind the island, eyes wide. "She's on to us," he muttered. "You need to go, right now." Carla stood, her face grim. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll call a taxi." Neither said a word as they hurried to the back door. Carla paused momentarily, turning to Mark with tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of this. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, unable to find words. Then, without further ceremony, Carla rushed out the back, disappearing into the alley. Mark closed the door, exhaling a shaky breath. He could almost taste freedom, an escape from the swirling nightmare, if he could manage to keep the police at bay and Sarah unaware. But his relief was premature. For even as Carla vanished from sight, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah was home early, carrying a bag of groceries. She spotted him at the back door, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you standing there like that?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Who was just here?" Mark's stomach twisted in knots. He searched for an excuse, stumbling over words. Nobody. I was just getting some air." Sarah glanced around suspiciously. "Why are you so jumpy, Mark?" He forced a smile that crumbled under Sarah's penetrating stare. Her gaze flicked to the back alley, the slight disarray of the kitchen, the traces of a second coffee mug on the counter. She wasn't naive. She knew him too well. And in that charged silence, Mark felt the final threads of his deceit unraveling. The confrontation Mark had dreaded finally erupted. Sarah demanded answers. Who was staying in the guest room? Why did she find a woman's hairbrush in the bathroom? Why was the police officer here? Each question hammered Mark's fragile composure. At first, he attempted to spin more lies, but Sarah's teary gaze and trembling voice shattered his defenses. Something in him finally broke. He confessed haltingly at first, then in a rush of words he couldn't control. He admitted to the affair, Carla's overnight stays, the police involvement. The only part he censored was Carla's criminal entanglements. He simply told Sarah that Carla was in trouble and the police had come around to question them. Sarah, stunned into silence, gripped the countertop as if to steady herself. Her face went pale and her lips parted in disbelief. She said nothing for a long moment, then asked the question that terrified him. "Did you let her sleep? In our bed?" In the bed where I've been sleeping while carrying your child. Mark wanted to lie, but the weight of his sins was too great. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The noise that escaped Sarah's throat sounded like a wounded animal, a strangled cry of agony. She turned away, pressing a hand to her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. You brought her into our home, into my bed. What kind of monster are you? She spat, voice thick with revulsion. He reached out, but she recoiled. Sarah, I'm sorry, he whispered, but he couldn't find words to justify the unforgivable. Without warning, Sarah's emotions surged, and she slammed her hand against the cupboard. The baby inside her kicked violently, as though sensing her turmoil. Trembling. Sarah stumbled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. Mark followed, guilt etched on his face, but she held up a hand. Stay away, she said. Her voice choked. I need to think. I need to understand how I married someone who could do this to me. He stood there, helpless, wanting nothing more than to console her to undo every wrong decision. But the damage was done. There was no comfort he could offer that would mend the gaping wound in her chest. It was in the midst of this tense standoff that another knock came at the door. 3 hard, distinct raps that echoed through the silent house. Mark closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Sarah sat upright, alarmed, her tear-streaked face turning toward the tumult entrance. When Mark opened the door, Officer Morales and Officer Thompson stood there again, expressions grave. This time they weren't alone. A plain-clothes detective accompanied them, a badge clipped to his belt. Mark's heart dropped. Mr. Anderson, the detective said, voice clipped. May we come in? Mark stepped aside, mind spinning. Sarah, rising from the couch, locked eyes with him, fear and betrayal mingling on her face. The detective introduced himself as Detective James Carter. We've been investigating certain criminal activities involving Carla Rodriguez, Carter stated, flipping open a small notebook. We have reason to believe she's been using associates, willing or otherwise, to conceal her whereabouts and possibly launder money. We have reason to believe you might have information. Mark's hands shook. I only knew she was in some sort of trouble. She said she owed money. That's all. Detective Carter nodded. She's wanted for questioning related to fraud and conspiracy. We believe she's been leveraging personal relationships to hide assets. Are you aware of any large sums of money being transferred through your accounts, Mr. Anderson? The question hit Mark like a blow to the gut. Instantly, he recalled the times he'd covered Carla's expenses, the secret transfers. At the time, he thought it was just gifts or petty cash. Had she used him for something bigger? No. Mark lied weakly, his voice faltering. I mean, I gave her money for personal emergencies, but not large sums. The detective studied Mark's face. Ms. Rodriguez was reported at this address yesterday. We have statements from a neighbor that a woman matching her description entered your home late at night. Is that correct? Sarah's eyes turned accusatory. She glared at Mark, arms folded protectively over her belly. Mark caught between fear of legal repercussions and shame before his wife nodded slowly. She was here, but she left. Detective Carter flicked through his notes, then addressed Sarah directly. Mrs. Anderson, were you aware that Ms. Rodriguez spent time in your home? Sarah's expression tightened, tears brimming again. I only just found out. She managed her voice laced with bitterness. Carter frowned, turning back to Mark. We'll be checking your financial records. If we find any evidence that you assisted Ms. Rodriguez in illegal activities, you'll be charged as an accomplice." Terror seized Mark. This was far worse than a mere affair exposed. He could face criminal charges. In a panic, he exclaimed, "I had no idea. She told me she was in trouble, but I didn't know about any illegal schemes. I was just trying to help." The detective let silence reign for a moment, before nodding to Officer Morales and Officer Thompson. "Let's go," he said, handing Mark his card. "If Ms. Rodriguez contacts you, call immediately, or there will be consequences." As they left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, trembling. Mark stood in the foyer, the detective's card clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of his actions closed in on him like a suffocating fog. He had betrayed his wife, endangered their child, and now potentially implicated himself in a criminal case. His once perfect life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. After the police left, silence descended in the living room. Sarah turned to Mark, tears shimmering in her eyes. He tried to approach, to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. "I can't do this, Mark," she said. Voice hollow. "You lied to me. You let her into our home. You risked our baby's safety." He felt the sting of her words, but any defense he tried to muster sounded weak. He could only say, "I'm sorry," so many times before it meant nothing. Sarah cradled her belly. "I need space. I need to think about how we're going to move forward, if we even can." He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd rectify everything. But how could he? The scars were too deep. Sarah rose shakily, gathering her purse and keys. "Where are you going?" Mark asked, panic welling up in him. To Jessica's, Sarah replied, "I need someone I can trust right now." Mark nodded, knowing he had no right to stop her. He watched as she left the door, clicking softly behind her, a symbol of the distance that had grown between them. Alone in the quiet house, Mark felt a wave of despair crash over him. Everything was unraveling, and he wasn't sure there was enough thread left to stitch his life back together. Days passed. Sarah remained with Jessica, avoiding Mark's calls, except for brief updates about her pregnancy. She needed to check in with her doctor regularly, and Mark was sick with worry about her stress levels. He texted her, apologies poured out his remorse in long messages, but rarely received more than a one-word reply. Meanwhile, the police made good on their promise to investigate Mark's finances. They subpoenaed his bank statements and credit card records. He had to retain a lawyer, a tired, middle-aged man named Leonard Price, who took Mark's frantic calls at all hours. Price assured Mark that unless they found direct evidence of large-scale fraud, he'd likely avoid severe charges. But the possibility of an arrest loomed, overshadowing every waking moment. Carla, for her part, vanished entirely. Mark heard nothing from her, no texts, no calls. He told the police he hadn't seen her, which was the truth. She had disappeared without a trace. Detective Carter stopped by once more, questioning Mark about specific transactions. Mark tried to explain they were gifts or petty loans, but Carter remained skeptical. Jessica occasionally messaged Mark in Sarah's stead, telling him to stay away until further notice. She informed him that Sarah was safe, but deeply distressed, her blood pressure rising dangerously due to the emotional turmoil. Hearing that Mark felt crippling guilt. He had pledged to love and protect Sarah, and yet he was the one jeopardizing her health and possibly their child's. A week later, the phone rang. Mark answered automatically, half hoping it was Sarah. Instead, Carla's voice crackled on the other end. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said. sounding frazzled. "I heard the police are looking for me. I can't run forever. I've decided to turn myself in." He sank into a chair, relief and dread warring within him. "That's probably the best thing," he said. "They think I helped you launder money or something. You have to clear this up." She sighed. "I will. Look, I used your accounts to park some funds temporarily. I never meant to drag you down. I just needed a place to hide it. My ex threatened me if I didn't get him the money." Mark's jaw clenched. "Carla, you had no right." "I know," she interrupted. "I've made a mess. I'm going to explain everything to the police, tell them you weren't involved. You deserve that much." Anger flared in Mark, but he also recognized this might be his lifeline, the only way to avoid charges. "Just make sure you do the right thing." Her voice trembled. "I will. I truly did care for you, Mark, in my own selfish way." Before he could respond, she hung up, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He called his lawyer immediately, who advised him to wait for Carla's statement and remain cooperative. That night, Mark received another call, this time from Detective Carter. Carla had turned herself in, and she had indeed explained that Mark was clueless about the fraudulent aspect of her finances. The detective's tone was neutral, but Mark sensed a hint of relief. "You're free from suspicion for now, Mr. Anderson," Carter said. "But we'll verify her statement. If there's any discrepancy, we'll be in touch." When Mark ended the call, he exhaled a long breath of relief. The nightmare might finally be nearing an end, at least on the criminal side. But the personal damage remained gaping and raw. With Carla's arrest and her confession clearing Mark of wrongdoing, the legal nightmare finally eased. Now all Mark could focus on was repairing what truly mattered: his marriage. He reached out to Sarah repeatedly through messages and letters, begging for a chance to talk. After encouragement from Jessica, Sarah agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. Mark arrived early, nervous and remorseful. When Sarah walked in, she looked tired but strong. They sat in silence for a moment before Mark spoke. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, voice trembling. "But please let me prove I've changed." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You risked everything for what you let her into our home, into our bed." Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said. "Just the chance to be a good father, to be better." "I need time," Sarah whispered. "I have to think about what's best for the baby." Mark nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. There was still pain between them, but there was also a door left ajar, just wide enough for the possibility of redemption. Mark moved into a small apartment, giving Sarah space while she stayed home preparing for the baby. He began therapy and parenting classes, determined to change. Jessica helped coordinate visits, and Sarah let Mark attend doctor appointments. At the ultrasound, they saw their daughter's face. Mark cried, overwhelmed. Sarah remained distant, but acknowledged his efforts. She appreciated his support, even if trust hadn't returned. Hints from Jessica suggested Sarah hadn't given up entirely. Still, the wounds ran deep. For now, they focused on the baby, unsure of what the future held, but both still holding on just a little. When Sarah went into early labor, she called Mark in panic. He rushed her to the hospital and never left her side. For 3 tense days he stayed by her bed, helping however he could. As Sarah rested, Mark silently vowed to earn back her trust. One night, she stirred and whispered, "I hate what you did, but I see you're trying." Mark held her hand gently. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her eyes softened. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. And for Mark, that was everything. Back home, on bed rest, Sarah allowed Mark to help during the day, though he returned to his studio apartment at night. Their conversations grew more civil, focused on Emily's future. One afternoon, Sarah suggested counseling, not to save the marriage yet, but to learn how to co-parent. Mark agreed eagerly. Sessions with Dr. Christine Lee were raw and painful. Sarah voiced her heartbreak. Mark confronted his fears and guilt. It wasn't healing overnight, but it was a beginning. Each meeting chipped away at their distance, offering a small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be rebuilt. At 9 months pregnant, Sarah went into labor. Mark was at her side through every contraction, with Jessica offering support. After hours of pain and anticipation, their daughter arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry and a head full of dark hair. As Mark cradled Emily, Grace Anderson, tears streamed down his face. For a fleeting moment past, betrayals faded beneath the miracle of her birth. Sarah watched silently, eyes full of conflicting emotions. In that fragile peace, they shared an unspoken understanding. Mark devoted himself to fatherhood, staying up through night feedings, changing diapers, and caring for Sarah during recovery. Though still cautious, Sarah allowed him back into the home, but not her heart, not fully. The counselor advised they take things slow and focus on Emily's well-being. Carla's case concluded with her conviction. Mark was officially cleared, but the damage to his marriage endured. It took nearly a year of therapy and honest effort before Sarah was willing to try again. She laid out clear rules, complete transparency, shared accounts, no more secrets. Mark agreed without hesitation. They weren't the same couple as before, but in their brokenness, they found a way forward, anchored by love for their child and a hard-won trust. Roamed hope found its way back. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strenuous journey toward redemption. Life can twist us in unexpected ways, testing bonds and pushing us to the very edge of what we believe is possible. In Mark and Sarah's story, we're reminded that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always a chance, however slim, for forgiveness, if we're willing to face our own failings and fight to make things right. Perhaps their story resonates with you, or someone you know, urging us all to recognize the fragility of trust and the power of second chances.